following story is 100% real and happened to me about 6 years ago. I've been meaning to share it, but never really had the outlet to do so. So now, I'll actually be able to tell someone. About 6 years ago, I was moving into my first house that I was renting. It was in a small town near Portland, Oregon, about 6 miles from, I'd say, the nearest neighbor. It was a country home. It was nice, a little bit older, had some history to it, but it was affordable. At least a lot more affordable than the condos or some of the inner city homes that were for rent. My credit was good enough and I was accepted upon submitting the application, and I moved in the early summer. Was, or the actual owner of the house, my renter, had placed it there for the leisure of whoever was living there. Now the streetlight didn't shine too much into my street, and more so back into the field. I'd say at least 30 feet. It was an older light too, so it wasn't really easy to make out what was on the ground, if anything was out there, and even the bench itself was a little hazy. My house was 2 stories, and my office, that I was actually sleeping in at the time and called it my room, had a window facing outside across the street. The lamp was directly adjacent to my window, and beneath this lamp was where the bench was. That night in particular, I had just gotten my internet installed for the second time because the first company I went with was much too slow. And so I was excited. I was downloading some movies and maybe just messing around on the computer. My desk was up against the window facing outside. It was around this time that I would leisurely glance outside, especially if something caught my eye. And something did that night. I looked across the street and I saw a black lump, almost like a bag. At first I thought it was a person laying down, just a little bit back in the grass, almost to the edge of where the streetlight shone, but I could still make it out. It wasn't moving, even though there was a slight wind that afternoon. It was also around 10:30 p.m., so it was pretty dark outside, and the streetlight was on full blast. But it was definitely a foreign object, and I swear I didn't see it that day, or even earlier that night when I first sat down at my desk. I decided not to pay much attention to it, but every few minutes or so I would glance up and see if it had moved, or see if I could maybe get a better look at it to figure out exactly what it was. It never did. It was after about 45 minutes that I glanced up for about the 10th time, and I noticed it was gone. The hairs rose up on the back of my neck, and I almost felt a little tingling sensation of fear. I wasn't terrified, but I was wondering, what the heck was that? I am so far away from any other neighbor or anything, and I know that I'd just seen it. I'd seen it there for 45 minutes, and then somehow it vanished. within a matter of seconds, it seemed. Maybe that's why I stared up at in the first place, was because I saw the sudden movement of it out of the corner of my eye, and I looked up. I thought it could maybe be an animal, but I didn't know any animals that could look like that. And it was large and long, almost the size of a human, or possibly a human curled up, laying down. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and a few minutes later, I grabbed my flashlight and proceeded to head down the stairs. I wanted to check out, to see what it was. As I went down the stairs, I grabbed my flashlight, put on my shoes, and I left the house. I made my way across the field and continued to investigate. It didn't look like anything too heavy was there, and if something heavy had been laying there, it looked like the grass, which was a moderate length, had been brushed back, so there was no impression of anything heavy being laid there. After a few minutes, me shining my flashlight around the field and my yard, I decided it was probably nothing, maybe an animal, and I decided to go back inside. I crossed the street, walked up to my door, and I attempted to turn the handle, open the door, but it was locked. I knew I hadn't locked the door. I knew I hadn't. At the time, I still only had one solitary house key, and it wasn't attached to my keychain. I didn't have that key with me, and I usually didn't lock the door when I was home because there really was no reason to do so. No one ever came out there. I was literally in the middle of nowhere. I was a little bit terrified at this point. I'd never had this problem before, and I knew the door had to have been locked from the inside, especially because there is no handle lock and only a deadbolt. I was a little perplexed, but I kind of wrote it off as just a strange anomaly and decided to make my way around the house and see if any of my windows or back door was open or unlocked. So I walked around the right side of the house. That wall goes right past my living room, where the lights were turned off, besides the light of the moon shining through the back window, casting some light against the far wall of my living room and on the floor. There's 3 windows on the side of the house that I had to pass by, all peering into my living room. As I walked by the first window, I noticed something out of the corner of my left eye. It's the shadow of a man standing against my wall. I can only see a partial shadow because he's only partially standing in the light, almost as if he chose to stand in the light because he knew I would see him, at least a little bit. This guy looked moderately thin, but he did look pretty tall, and if he was that thing in the field, he had to have been curled up. I froze in terror, and I moved quickly to the left of me in between the 2 windows. There was one more window on the back side, and these windows didn't open. They didn't have a slider or any screen on them at all. I froze in terror, and I did not know what to do. My gut almost twisted up. I thought for sure I had an intruder, and I had no idea how he got into my house. I decided maybe he didn't see me, and that the only thing I could do, because I didn't have my key, was to go back to the sliding glass door and scare him out. Of course, after much debate, I decided to do this, and as I made my way, turning left, walking slowly to the back of the house, when I came to the next window, I decided to crawl beneath it so he couldn't see me if he was still in there. So about halfway across, crawling under the window, I hear a boom, almost like the sound of a bird hitting a window, or someone pushing their hand against it, like a tap, but louder. I look up immediately, and I see the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in my entire life. There's a man with his face pressed up against the glass, and I think he's staring at me, but his eyes are almost sunken into his head in this strange, disgusting, mummified way. I didn't know what I was looking at. I'd never seen anyone look like this in my entire life. And I didn't know if it was just the heat of the moment and me being scared that was causing me to see things. I literally felt like I was staring him in the eyes for 10 minutes. Well, in reality, it was probably only 10 seconds. This is when my fight or flight response must have kicked in, because I bolted back towards my front yard into the light of the street light. This is when I heard keys jingling around in my jacket pocket, and I realized I didn't have my house key that wasn't attached to my keychain, but I did have my keychain. I whipped my keys out, unlocked my car, which was parked on the street, jumped inside, and I've never pulled out of a place quicker in my entire life. Usually it would take me about 20 minutes to get into town, but tonight and that night, I literally got there in 5. I knew where the police station was, and that's exactly where I drove, as I didn't have my phone on me, so I couldn't call anybody. It was still open, as this is a moderately sized town once you drive into it, and it's open 24 hours. After I told everyone what had happened and filed a police report, it was during the time that I was filling it out. They sent 2 officers to the house. They went around back, and the sliding glass door was locked. They didn't see anyone in the house, as the front door was actually open a crack. They went through the house, searched everywhere, but I refused to sleep in the house for 2 more days, as I thought that whoever it was, or whatever it was still maybe hiding in my house. It was only after returning that the next twist in the story comes. I tried to lock my door with my key the first night after sleeping there, but my key wouldn't fit the lock. I thought it was odd, and I called my landlord, who showed up later that day, and to our surprise found out that his key didn't work either. We called a locksmith, and after that the police, because we found something in the back of the lock. It was the broken off tip of a knife, as if someone had tried to pick the lock and failed. Needless to say, I never slept another night in that house. I stayed in a hotel and moved out that week. I think the landlord kind of felt bad for me, because he still gave me my deposit back, which I was very grateful for at the time. I had to put down a new one on a new place. I haven't visited that town in 6 years since the incident occurred, and I don't think that I ever will again. This was by far the most terrifying experience of my life, and I'm still not really sure what happened. Thank you for listening to my story, and please check out the other videos on my channel. We're starting a new schedule. That schedule includes a video like this every Monday, sometimes even being longer and containing multiple videos. Once again, thank you for listening. Please subscribe, and have a good night.